Maddie did a quick little video on what's happening with Starfield, and the thing that interested me the most was the response in the comments, actually. So I think we'll just get a little bit of context from Maddie in the video itself, and then I want to go to the comment section and just dig into it a little bit more. And then we have, like, you know, BlizzCon here in a bit, and we've got I want to talk about Total War and Creative Assembly, the guys that are just single-handedly destroying that franchise, which is tragic, but we'll get into all of that. But we'll start with Maddie. And basically, just to frame this, like, the most hardcore Bethesda fans, you guys know, before the game came out, it was very, very hard to get anybody to acknowledge shortcomings or concerns with the game. I mean, it's why, like, I would make those skeptical look videos, or videos trying to calm down the hype. You know, hype makes you stupid. You know, I would try to calm them down, talk them off the cliff a little bit, and nobody wanted to listen to it in these communities that were pretty die-hard, devoted to the game. But now the game's come out, and people have had time to settle on it, to think about it, to ponder it. And what's amazing to me is that even Bethesda's fans are starting to come around and be like, yeah, there's some quirks. You know, there's some things we would hope to change. And I am here for it. I'm so glad that people are seeing this now. And maybe, just maybe, next time they'll come around fully and they won't get so hyped in the first place. You know, I got a very sweet DM on Twitter from somebody that was basically just like, thank you for talking, I think they phrased it as talking me off the cliff of Starfield hype. And he's like, because once I got my hands on the game, I played it for about 10 hours and I realized it just was not what I was looking for. And it was pretty disappointing. But he's like, I can only imagine how crushed I would be if I'd gotten really hyped up for it and then gotten my hands on it. So thank you. And I thought it was very, very sweet. Okay, Maddie.
Maddie here today. I hope all of you are doing fantastic. Today we're sitting down to answer
I am, Maddie. Thank you.
one key question. What's happening with Starfield? There's been a lot of conversation surrounding the game as the months have persisted onward. Many saying the game is dead. It's fallen off a cliff. There's no conversation around it.
I've seen that too. Honestly, I've felt it as well. It just seems like, you know, Phantom Liberty dropped soon after and people went back to Baldur's Gate, and like also the Star Citizen, like the Citizen Con thing was just such a slap upside the head. If you've not seen our like look at the Star Engine thing, look that up. Jacob, when he does the stream clip, will put it in the description. You got to check that out, because it's, the whole thing is basically just one big jab at Starfield. They're like, Kevin, everything you're about to see is running in real time with no load screens. In real time, surface of the planet, straight into outer space. And then you go and you can warp to another planet in the solar system in the matter of seconds without a load screen. And like, they just go back and forth and constantly just burr. It's like, stop, they're already dead. And I think all of this is combined to give Starfield an aura of just feeling very, I think, lackluster by comparison. And like I mentioned at the top of the stream, I went back to Starfield last night to start going through some extra parts to prep for some like a big video we're working on. And dear God Almighty, I mean, you guys know I run with a 4090. This computer should have no problem at all running this game at the highest possible settings, and it cannot run this thing above 65 frames on like high settings at 4K. Like, it's insane. It's ridiculous. I can play like Phantom Liberty at native 4K with ray tracing and stuff enabled. Looks way, way better. No load screens, seamless open world, and it runs at like 100 plus frames a second. It's just ridiculous how many things within Starfield are just, I don't even know. It's clunky. Parts of it are just straight up broken, and other parts are design decisions that are just not, frankly, competitive with the modern market.
Many stats saying the exact opposite. There's also been updates that have finally hit the game that were needed at launch, key features missing, such as DLSS support, which we'll talk about in a moment, and many wondering when Bethesda is going to announce plans to respond to some of the criticisms that have been put at the feet of Starfield.
One thing with DLSS, by the way, so DLSS was added on launch day, or I think it was the day after launch day, into Starfield by a fan modding it. And it's taken Bethesda this long to get DLSS out. It's not even, I think, technically out yet. It's still coming in November at some point. At least it wasn't there when I played the game last night. So like they're still working on it. And I've asked people, like, can somebody help me understand why modders are able to get this working in a day, but Bethesda can't issue like a hot fix just to quickly patch it in? Like, I honestly don't get it. And I understand there's extra approvals you have to get. There's regulatory stuff sometimes, and it's not as simple as just pressing a button and now there's DLSS. I get that. But surely it should be able to be done within a week. If a modder could do it in a day, shouldn't a team of like 300 plus people be able to get this thing out within a week? But it's been months. You know, it's just insane to me. And the fact that DLSS was missing in the first place was weird. AMD of all companies had to come out and be like, no, we don't have an exclusive deal with them for FSR2. AMD came out and said that. So everybody's like, wait, but if you don't have an exclusive deal for FSR2, like, why isn't DLSS in it? Because DLSS is way better than FSR2. And Bethesda's just like, what? Like they didn't know. It's just crazy. There's so many little things like this. I don't understand why loading screen is such a big deal. People keep playing Zelda and the loading screens are way longer than Starfield. Once you're in Tears of the Kingdom, you're in. Like, once you're playing the game, you're in. You can go from the Skylands, and then you can jump down to the surface of the map and then down into the Underdark and no load screens. Like, just straight up skydiving straight down. And that runs on a toaster. You know, and that seamless experience matters for games about adventure and exploration and especially immersion, which Starfield is allegedly about. And I just think it's if you're going to have load screens, it better be for a good reason. And with Starfield, there's never really that much of a good reason. Like, you load into a fishbowl and then you can kind of explore around the fishbowl, walking 3, 4, 5 minutes between points of interest, and then you hop back in your ship and you load somewhere else. Like, it doesn't feel like you're loading into a huge, crazy new world. Like, honestly, if you could just freely explore the world, the planet that you land on, like, and there was a load screen, I think I could at least understand that. I would still be like, hey, No Man's Sky, like Star Citizen, they're all doing it already. Like, they don't need the load screen, so what's your excuse? But at the very least, then I would get it. With Starfield, though, you load into these little areas, and it just feels outdated. It just really does. Yeah, it is what it is. Then can you explain the patience you guys have with travel between planets at Star Citizen? At the start of the game, so just to be clear, I'm sorry, Maddie, I did do you dirty. There we go. Okay. At the start of the game, when you like say, you start out with like the $45 like starter package for Star Citizen, you have the starter ship. You've not upgraded anything. You've not upgraded warp drives. You haven't upgraded anything. You're not expected, just like with any other video game, to try and fly to the end locations, the end planets far, far away right off the rip. You're expected to mainly hang out in that area. You're going to be completing missions in that planet area until you have the money to then upgrade your ship, get a better one, buy a new whatever, which have faster warp drives that make that travel not that big of a deal. I think a lot of people will try to go in and they have like the starter ship and they're like, oh my God, it takes like 6 minutes for me to warp to the other side of the solar system. It's like, yeah, you're not really expected to like start off the rip doing that. Like, you're kind of expected to try to work your way up. So like, I grant you, yeah, there's a good amount of time traveling between planets and systems in Star Citizen, absolutely. But most of that's just determined by your equipment, by your gear, by your kit up in your ship, and all of that can be altered and changed as it goes. 6 minutes long, yeah, 15. I guess, yeah, if you're going straight to the other side of the solar system, it can be like 15. Yeah, it can be a lot. I mean, the systems are huge. I mean, it's ridiculous. But it's also definitely very much a hard sci-fi compared to a soft sci-fi, which is closer to what Starfield is. It's not trying to be super realistic, whereas Star Citizen is aiming to be more grounded. So it's just, you know, slightly different in terms of what they're trying to do. They could gamify it more and have it be just, you know, a matter of seconds, but at least as of right now, they haven't done that.
What's going to happen with the Shattered Space expansion? What's going to happen with modding? How's it going to be handled on consoles? There's many questions still surrounding Starfield, all because many people are anticipating what is happening next. But to cap off this entire conversation, I wanted to get into a very important interview that was conducted by MinMax with Bruce Nesmith, who served as the senior systems designer for Starfield. So a former Bethesda Game Studios veteran who worked extensively on Starfield, and get some insight into the processes and decision-making surrounding this game to kind of perfectly encapsulate
the name's super familiar.
Happening
Bruce
with this
Nesmith,
game,
that's super
and how
familiar.
Bethesda may or may not respond to the game's biggest criticism. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, if you're new here and you're into Starfield news, information, conversations, you're in the right place. Please do consider subscribing. I want to
Yeah, go sub to Matty. I know we meme on him sometimes because he loves Bethesda stuff, but he's a great dude. Makes some great content. He's one of the most persistent, hardworking guys I've ever done collabs with or anything. Show him some love.
start off at the top with the latest patch to hit Starfield, because I think it's an important way to set the tone. So the latest addition is DLSS support, which has been posted on Bethesda's Twitter account, where they write, "We've been hard at work on Starfield updates, and we'll be putting our next one into the Steam beta next week. This update will feature NVIDIA DLSS support with frame generation, display, and HDR controls for supported systems, and other optimizations and improvements. You'll be able to opt in to try it via Steam beta options. We'd love your feedback before it goes live."
Dude, how bad will it run that they're putting it in Steam beta? It's not even in the core update. I don't know if I have the strength to update, like to put my version of Starfield on a beta path. Like, oh man, it's got to run like absolute ass if they're doing that, right? Like, surely.
For all PC and Xbox players. Stay tuned for specifics soon, and thanks for playing. Now, one of the reasons behind this delay, many believe, although it's never been officially confirmed, is when Bethesda signed that deal with AMD, they were the official PC partner, and AMD claimed, like, we're not doing anything to prevent DLSS from arriving. But I've always said that it may have been in Bethesda Game Studios' best interest to have that arrive later because of that partnership. That is just speculation, we're not sure, but it's finally going to be hitting Steam beta next week. Many people wanting more.
I just don't know why AMD would come out and say, no, they don't have a deal with us for exclusive FSR stuff. Like, they could put DLSS in, it's not a big deal. I don't know what Bethesda gets out of that. Like, I guess maybe they just didn't want to, like, I think it's just another example of them just not wanting to be arsed. They're like, no, we have a deal with FSR2. AMD engineers helped us put FSR2 in the game. Like, we don't want to have to do NVIDIA's stuff all by ourselves. Like, no.
Or massive updates, I understand, and I think that's mostly fueled by Cyberpunk, where we've been in the thick of massive updates for that game, because originally those starting updates when the game was completely broken were smaller, quality of life, key feature additions like what we're seeing here. And I don't think it's going to be until 2024 that you see those massive gameplay changes like city maps, for example, hit Starfield. So I'd shift your expectations accordingly.
Yeah, the city map thing, again, just baffles me. That's not like a little oopsie poopsie. That's like, what the hell were you thinking?
But the reason I wanted to set the tone with that is because despite all the conversation surrounding Starfield, you wouldn't be faulted for thinking it's gone a bit sour. If you head over to Steam, which is not the end all be all, but is at least a good gauge on conversation alongside the likes of Reddit and other social media platforms, you'll see Starfield is currently sitting at a mixed review rating, at least for the last 10,000 reviews that have been submitted for the game. This is important because it's not like it's a last wave. We'll show stats in a little bit that Starfield is consistently getting incredible play. Now, I don't want to completely hyperfixate on these review scores, but it is important because it is an update to a previous conversation we had about Starfield's reviews on Steam versus 76's, and how they were neck and neck, but the fact that Starfield was in the same company as 76 was kind of confusing to some. I'll say what I said previously, which is that 76 came to Steam with the Wastelanders update, so it had a much better starting point, whereas if it was there at launch, I think it would be well and below where Starfield currently is sitting. But yeah, Fallout 76 currently sits at 71.65% over on Steam, whereas Starfield is at 67.67%. So that gap, which was originally like 0.1, 0.2, and
it is tough to gauge how many of these are in good faith, though. And I'll defend Starfield on this one. Like, there's a lot of like, I think there's a lot of bad faith reviews on Steam. I don't know if this specifically is people that have played it. I would like to see, you know, a way to filter out reviews if they have less than like 2 hours of gameplay time or less than 5 hours. Because like people who are arguing in bad faith, they probably will download it, play it for an hour, and then refund it and move on. So if you could filter out all of those, I think that would be interesting. Then again, you would lose out on the genuine reviews of people like, I tried it for 2 hours and I just didn't like it, so I'm returning it, and here's my review of why I didn't like it. That would also be fair, because you wouldn't want to, you know, cut those out. But that's why, like, you just can never take this with very much You got to take it with a lot of salt because it doesn't really mean much of anything.
Many people believe Starfield would climb above it is now a much more significant gap. And the reason...
Yeah, it's the same with reviewing places on Yelp. Yeah, how often do you leave or do you bother to leave a review versus good experiences versus bad? Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. It's like if you go to a restaurant, you remember the times when things didn't go well way more than the times everything went totally fine. Like, I don't know how many times I've been to McDonald's in my life, but I can tell you the handful of times that they really screwed up my order, but I couldn't tell you about the times when everything was just totally fine because you forget about it, you know, it just in one ear out the other, you just move on. But when something goes bad, that sticks. Yeah, you always remember that.
This is all important to underscore is people do have legitimate criticisms of the game. Many people are complaining about the amount of loading, the exploration, the procedural content, stuff that is important to set the table here. I'm doing all this so that when we get into the interview, you have all this context. Despite all that, on the positive side of things, if you're Xbox, if you're Bethesda, you are thrilled about Starfield. These Steam reviews probably don't even matter to you. You go over here and you look at what Matt Piscatella of Circana had posted, and it shows that Starfield in the Xbox ecosystem was only surpassed by one game in September, and that was the biggest game on planet Earth, Fortnite. So when it comes to player count, Starfield is absolutely...
Fortnite, dab on the haters. Oh, Roblox is here. I was about to say, where's Roblox? But Roblox is here. Who's Xbox? Let's see. Ecosystem. Monthly active users for September. Yeah, I mean, it's September. Like, again, it's still crazy to see GTA here. That's crazy. But it's for September. You'd hope that it's Xbox's biggest launch. Like, you'd really hope that with it being the biggest release there that they would have close to the highest monthly active users. But I'd be interested in what this stat is today for October.
Absolutely titanic. And you look now, even almost 2 months after launch, and Starfield is still in the top 10 most played games on Xbox next to Battle Royale like Apex Legends. You have GTA 5 there. The newest NBA game is there. You have Roblox there, Call of Duty, Fortnite. You're next to Minecraft, Madden. So Starfield as a single player game is standing there with some of the biggest beasts in the industry. And that is absolutely commendable and cannot continue to be overlooked. Starfield is, as my good friend Jess Corden put it,
I will overlook it. I'm just kidding. No, I mean, I agree. It's admirable. It's good. They're doing great. I don't know. Like, maybe I'm just a cynic, but I don't put a lot of weight into curated lists produced by companies. Like, if Sony puts out Spider-Man 2 and then they're like, oh, look at Spider-Man 2 is on what's popular now on the list in our store. Like, I'm assuming the game's popular, but I'm not assuming that was like put together in the most independent, unbiased way. Like, even if it wasn't doing great, it would still probably be there, you know? Like, I don't know if I would put much weight on curated lists. I just personally. But I mean, yeah, clearly people are playing it, people are enjoying it, but it seems that very diehard people are playing it, and for the average consumer, they've kind of moved on to other things.
Pretty much,
which I think is the main
like, you're not just investing
discussion
now,
point.
You're investing into the future, right? Like, you know, they're going to be updates. Bethesda's already promised 5+ years of updates, so many people are excited by that. And I suspect this player count will see massive boosts, where I can imagine Starfield surging back up to the top 3 if they drop Shattered Space and it's really good. Now, with all the data out there, it's time to get into the opinion of things to then dive into the interview segment of the video. Starfield is a game that definitely shows its biggest weaknesses at the front of the experience, right? From the planet count to the procedural content to the guided exploration, the redundant tutorials that oftentimes actually leave you confused, but it's a very special...
And there's a lot of stuff that they never teach you. Like, there's a lot of little stuff you don't realize. Like, focusing your mining beam does more damage, I guess if you call it damage, to the thing that you're mining. So if you focus the beam, it kind of charges it quickly. Like, little bitty things that they just never tell you. Maybe they added the tutorial in to clarify that now, but when I played it, it didn't have that. There's just a lot of little stuff. So I would agree. I mean, it wears its issues on its shoulder, which is, I guess, in one way admirable. They're not trying to hide it away, but it does make it very clear where, like, right off the rip, they just start throwing you into like constant load screens, constant like fast traveling as you go and collect things from 5 different planets and load every single time. Like, it's pretty jarring. I think it was also really bizarre, like, and this is granted just a very subjective thing. I thought it was weird that they start off and just give you a big ass spaceship right off the top. I thought surely they would start you off with something small, and then building your ship and upgrading it is like a long-term goal for the player. But instead, they start you off with like a pretty capable ship. and then you're just good to go. You know, I saw a bunch of videos of people that were like in the end game of Starfield, and they didn't really mess with the ship. They just kept using the one that they had. They did a couple of little upgrades to it, maybe swapped out engines or something. But I thought it was weird that they just started you off like that. I thought it would have made way more sense to start you off with something small that you work towards something bigger with.
Unique game, and as you go deeper into it, one of two things is happening to people, hence why it's so split down the middle. You have a game that you either fall more in love with due to its magnificence, or you have a game that you become jaded towards because the same issues continue to repeat. The loading screens, another procedural planet, the same content you saw on planet A is now on planet Z, and so on and so forth. Now all this is to set up,
and I absolutely agree. I mean, I think that's very accurate. There's some people that are at like 500 hours or 1,000 hours or whatever now, and they're having more fun with it now than they did when they started playing it. For me, the more I play it, the more I loathe it, the more I detest it. And a part of it is that when you play a lot of a game that you're just not loving, if you force yourself to keep playing it, you start to get really burnt out, which is why I took like a big break from it. But then going back to it now, I'm like, nope, I still don't want to be here. You know? So I think I definitely fit in that category, but there's absolutely people that have been playing it for, at this point, like 2 full months and are having a great time and want to just keep playing it, and you know, they're loving it. I'm glad for those people. I'm glad they got the game they were hoping for, but it is crazy how polarizing the game is. And it seems that most of the polarization is tied up in how much of the clunk you can tolerate. If you can tolerate crazy load screens, the constant fast traveling, the small fishbowl environments, the empty spaces between points of interest on planets while you're exploring. If you can tolerate all that stuff, the weird like change in camera angle and cinematic camera during conversations, even though they had a much better system working in Fallout 4. If you can tolerate all that, you can probably have a great time. But if you're somebody that plays a lot of newer games, if you're somebody that cares about things being comparable to their peers, like, you're going to burn out, I think.
What is now this interview here. So let's get into some key quotes from senior systems designer Bruce Naismith, who had some really, I think, crucial things to point out here when it came to Starfield and its development cycle, where he says, Todd Howard pretty much pulled the number 100 for the number of solar systems out of thin air. But the more we went on, the more it was like, okay, so all core activity takes place in these 24 in the settled systems, and the rest of it is open space. But people love our big open games. They love the open area to explore, so let's go ahead and let them have it. I think some of the exploration stuff didn't come through as well as it could have because they decided to make other choices, he says. And never misunderstand this. In every game studio on the face of this planet, they know the choices they're making. They know the things that are not going to be in there. They know what the players are going to moan about, but you've got to make that hard choice.
Yeah. No, I think that's fair. And it's also just, if we think like, how could they forget this? They were working on this for like a decade, sitting in the office every day, talking about it, day in, day out. They didn't forget about anything. They chose to not have it. It's like the rovers. People, like, the one thing I've heard every fan kind of agree on with Starfield is the game would be better if you had like a rover to explore these big empty spaces with. The game would be better, which is why so many of them started coping and being like, it's because they are in the game, but they're just going to be modded in or added in as part of an expansion later, or it'll be an update, a free update. Or before the game had even launched, I had fanboys telling me in that Skeptical Look video where I was like, this seems like a big oversight to me. I had fanboys saying, no, they just haven't shown vehicles yet, but I bet there's going to be vehicles. They just are saving it as a big surprise. And now they look really, really stupid, but you know, who cares? They were defending, you know, for the Emperor God Howard. They were defending the Emperor in that moment. And so who cared if they were just making crap up as they went, you know? Spencer, thank you for the 2, by the way. Has anybody modded vehicles into Starfield yet? I've not seen them, and it seems like it's mainly because of engine restraints. And let me be clear, like, there's reasons why they don't have vehicles. Engine reasons, technical reasons why they don't have them. But that's not my problem. Like, if the game mandates, needs vehicles for exploration, you got to figure it out or change the way it's working so vehicles aren't needed. But they didn't do either of that, either of those things. Instead, the game just still needs vehicles, and it just still feels really kind of when you're trying to explore planets. And they didn't offer a solution to it, you know? Yeah, I would take a horse at this point. Give me a space horse. I'd be happier with that. Wet Donkey also, thank you for the 5. Starfield made me excited for Mass Effect 4, and I find it funny. That is a little funny. What I found most interesting was when I put up that survey asking people if they were more or less excited for Elder Scrolls 6 after playing Starfield. And it was like a solid 45% of people said that they were less excited after playing Starfield, which I thought was crazy. Like, we're talking about almost half of this sample size. I think like 30,000 people voted on that survey, and like half of them said that they're less excited for Elder Scrolls after playing Starfield because they've seen just how outdated it feels. And again, like, Bethesda has steadily been behind the curve technologically for like 15 years at this point, and it's only gotten worse as they've fallen further behind. The distance between them and the top of the line competitors gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And by the time we get Elder Scrolls 6, we're probably seeing Witcher 4 sometime around there. And we've seen what CDPR is capable of doing with Phantom Liberty and all of that. Just imagine how crappy Elder Scrolls is going to look as a fantasy game next to The Witcher 4. Like, it won't even be close. I think it's going to really come back to hurt them if they don't do some serious work to try and shake it. Because, man. But Luke, it's the creation engine too. Yeah. Cry me a river, dude. Drinner, also, thank you for the 5. What is that saying about your company if new releases are scaring your fan bases for future games? Exactly. Every game should excite your fans more for what comes next. But 45% were like, no, I'm less excited for it. And that's a huge problem. You ask that same question of people who played Phantom Liberty. We could do this survey and remind me at the end of the segment. I can put up the survey on the YouTube channel. We'll see what people say. But I would bet you good money, overwhelmingly, people will say they're more excited for The Witcher 4 after playing Phantom Liberty. But with Starfield, it's 45% are like, no, I'm kind of less about it. That's a huge problem. That is a stat that should really be freaking out BGS and Xbox. Like, that should be the big concern.
So what this sounds like to me is that over at Bethesda Game Studios, they had a conversation likely saying, hey, we're kind of leaning into procedural content here. 1,000 planets, lots of repeated objectives. Players are definitely going to run into this. Is it worth it? Is the scale worth it? And I think you got to say, according to Todd Howard, it was. And that's because, according to Bruce, all the final say decisions, while Todd will deny it, do go through him. So here's what he said. The success of several Bethesda-produced games meant that the team enlarged to a slightly uncomfortable size, according to Nesmith, which partially contributed to his leaving. There were a lot of changes going on, he says, and the structure of the company was also such that, half because of the pandemic and half because of the necessary changes, you didn't get to interact with Todd as much anymore. He was understanding of the change, though. When you're running 6 different studios and you've got a dozen projects going on at a time, he's only one man. But despite the lines of communication becoming a lot more rigid, Howard supposedly had the final say on most creative decisions.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I mean, as a company scales up, especially if it's built around kind of one guy, it gets really tough to figure out who should be allowed to talk to him and what you should do. Because if you allow every like small team lead to just go directly to Todd, like back in the Starfield or the Skyrim days, he's like all day, every day, all his meetings are just going to be talking with these little team leads. That doesn't work. You know, it just doesn't. He doesn't have enough time for that. So then you have to set up systems where, like, okay, Todd will talk to his executive producers and to his gameplay directors, and they will talk to each of their subordinates who are team leads of each sub-team under that. So everything funnels back to Todd, but through multiple lines of communication. And that can certainly make it more difficult. And it could explain why the magic of BGS games has seemingly been kind of fumbled recently, where it just feels like they're not quite doing the same thing they used to be able to do.
All decisions run through Todd. He would hate me for saying that because he doesn't believe it's true. But unfortunately, it is true. He recalled that when developers wanted anything different from the Bethesda usual, they would have to get the idea in front of him. The Starfield lead was also quick to point out that Howard wasn't keen on the organizational structure either. I will give him credit, he has tried really, really hard to not be the last say guy. It's not something he wants intellectually. The studio supposedly molded into that shape because Howard is somebody that has opinions and whose opinions are highly valuable. According to Nesmith.
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, if you have any boss in a structure like this, it's going to be really hard for him to be like, I don't care. Do whatever you want. What you think is best, do that. Maybe the way you do that is just by cutting off the communication. Maybe that was the strategy too. It's like everybody keeps coming to Todd to see what they should finalize for this system, and he's like, I don't want to be the one to make this decision. It's a creative, collaborative effort. So you're not allowed to talk to me. Go figure it out. Maybe they do that. I don't know. But yeah, I'm sure it's really tough.
The longtime Bethesda director was able to put himself in the seat of your everyday player to a far better extent than the rest of the design team. That attribute meant he was naturally the last say guy because he was able to see it from the Joe Average's player perspective, which makes you wonder a bit about...
I mean, the thing that always interested me about Todd watching all of those interviews from back in the day is that Todd would always describe it as, how do you make X fun? How do you make this something players want to do? And that's how he approached like Fallout 3. It's how he approached Skyrim. It's how he tried to approach Fallout 4. But it seems like as the company has scaled up, a lot of stuff has become, how do we shove more content in? How do we try to make this bigger and crazier? And it's become less about the player experience, because so many elements of Starfield are pretty bad for the player experience. I mean, the like 3-4 minutes of walking between points of interest on planets, that's bad. That's not fun. Just walking and then occasionally boosting with your jetpack, that's not fun. It just isn't. Like, maybe it's the fun for the first 2 times you do it because the jetpack can be kind of cool. And then you burn out on it. And you're like, oh, I have to run all the way over there. God damn it. And it happens all the time. So there's a lot of little bitty things about Starfield that I feel miss out on precisely that. They're not focused on the player experience. It's focused more instead on trying to make the game as big and crazy in scale as possible while not valuing the player experience.
About who BGS is catering to. When you look at the dialogue and the questing focus, Starfield, I feel as a longtime BGS fan, is catered directly to me. Absolutely through and through. This is some of the best quest work you have seen in a BGS game. No doubt about it in my eyes. But at the same time, you see a quote like that, and it kind of makes sense where Bethesda catered to the masses. Its sense of endlessness, 1,000+ planets, all of this procedural content, doubling down on what made Oblivion, but stripping out some of the best parts, leaving behind the sense of wandering, the exploring differently. And again, to Bethesda Game Studios' credit, they were aware of this while they said it extremely late. Todd Howard did say in an interview that the way you explore in Starfield is different, and he wonders if people are going to have a tough time with it, which is a quote we've gone back to ad nauseum, so I'm not going to beat a dead horse here, that I do think at the end of the day, I really like Starfield, but I think Bethesda sacrificed a little too much to get that vision across the table on what made their studio special. The reason I know that community-wise is because I'm starting to see people complimenting Fallout 4, and for the longest time...
Yeah. It's like, but the Bethesda community is almost flipping and doing the Call of Duty thing, where like a game releases, and they're like, this sucks, we hate it. Then time goes by, and they're like, actually, it's not bad. Maybe we were too harsh on it. And then the next game comes out and they're like, okay, this sucks. What we had before was awesome. And the developer's like, but you hated that. You hated what we did before. What are you talking about? It's like, no, we just were trying to be pretty critical, but shut up. You know, like, and I think Bethesda fans are doing the same thing. We're like, now I'm surprised by it too. I'm looking back at Fallout 4 and I'm like, I think the gunplay in a lot of ways was better in Fallout 4 than in Starfield. And then also the environments were way more interesting than in Starfield. And also exploration was way better than in Starfield. And like little bitty technological things, I think in some ways just the added color in Fallout 4 can look better in environments than Starfield's really flat presentation with the weird color filters they put on it. And I also think the cinematic cameras they had in Fallout 4 were way better than the static straight on thing that they do in Starfield for some reason. Like, they had it figured out. They did it better in Fallout. You know, I've been through it 1,000 times. I'm going to have an aneurysm if I keep going. Okay, just continuing.
Fallout 4 has been destroyed online by fans as this betrayal of all the conventional Bethesda Game Studios designs, right? The legendary weapons, the I'll mark another settlement on your map, the endless radio quest lines, just expanding and bloating the components that were first introduced into Skyrim as major mechanics and focusing on settlement building that was introduced in Hearthfire instead of focusing on questing and exploration. So to see people...
It is really funny that people hated on Fallout 4 for being bloated and trying to go too big, and now we have Starfield.
People saying, well, Fallout 4 got this right. It got the point A to point B and the distractions that would take you over and pull you away from your initial objective, and you'd still feel like you've done something meaningful. Like, Fallout 4 got that right. For me, as someone who's been in the thick of the community for a while, to start seeing that sort of talk, I found it shocking. I really did, because I've always defended Fallout 4. I've always said I think it's a fantastic game. Is it flawed? Absolutely, but I've always gone to the defense for it, famously so. Maybe a little too extreme at times. But I look at something like Starfield, and I wouldn't be surprised if this game went through the same discourse. And I hope, and I don't expect much from you two, but I would hope people got to this point in the conversation, because while I know it's an honest, critical look at the series, I do think that Starfield is a game, and I said this in my final verdict video. I think I said it in my impressions video when I had about 70 hours in the game. I do feel this is going to be that game that 3-4 years from now, the discourse starts to shift. And I don't know if that'll be because of updates or the general design of the game. That much we'll see. But I do feel like Starfield's a game that'll get its roses much later into its cycle. I think right now, in the heat of an extremely competitive year, I think Starfield, when it's scaled to the likes of Baldur's Gate 3, when it's scaled to the likes of Cyberpunk, I get why, for many, it pales in comparison. I totally get that. But
I don't know. I see what he's saying. And I think it reflects an impression that a lot of us have felt, which is that the reception of Starfield and the reception of it, both within the community and reviewers, has not been what they were expecting it to be or hoping it would be. And so they're like, yeah, it'll get there. It'll be better in the future. Like, people will fall in love with it later. And maybe that's true. But I would think that, especially for me, the biggest thing that factors into this is that we are about to see a flood in the next 1.5 to 2 years, some of which have been announced, some which have not. A flood of games that have been built from the ground up for this generation, for modern technology, using the SSDs, seamless data streaming, amazing graphics, crazy expansive utilizations of new AI systems and all sorts of stuff. And as time goes by, I think it's only going to grow more stark just how outdated Starfield feels. So there will be people, I'm sure, that go back and are like, actually, I think Starfield's really good, and I think I was too harsh on it. It's got a real charm to it. Maybe when they add DLC and stuff, that'll happen. But I think as time goes by, especially like the constant load screens, the very small areas to explore, all of that will only grow more obvious and more frustrating as we start to see more and more games that just make this pale in comparison. You know, it just won't even be close. In the same way that, like, if you go back and you try to play Assassin's Creed 3 right now, it's tough. I mean, it is tough. It came right at the precipice of the PS4 generation, of all these big open world games and the shift from linear stuff to open world. And it was kind of trying to do the open world thing, but it didn't do it very well. And it had these small kind of individual forest maps that kind of connect together with load screens. It just didn't feel great. It felt pretty good at the time, but nowadays you go back to it and it feels like that transitionary game. It feels like this ain't it, fam. Like, they were trying to do this thing that all these other games that came after did really, really well, but it just didn't do it very well at all. And I think it's going to be a similar thing with Starfield, where it's just going to feel extremely outdated as time goes by. It already, to me, feels very, very outdated, but I think it's only going to grow more dramatic.
But I think long term, as Starfield fills itself out more, and as people start to see what I think, and this may be sacrilegious, I find it to have very much New Vegas style qualities in the way its quest lines are handled, in its approach to its faction work. It reminds me of New Vegas in that way, but it also reminds me of New Vegas in that I remember when the game first came out, many people don't act like this was the case when it first launched, but when New Vegas first released, that was a game that was getting hammered. Many people were like, ugh, it's more Fallout 3, Obsidian lazy. Now it's the most celebrated Fallout game. And you can kind of thank Fallout 4 for that in a sense. I think 2020 hindsight is the
Yeah, I think Fallout 4 framed it, and it was also just a lot of this stuff is reframed after the fact. And I think Maddie's absolutely right. Like, let's say Fallout 4 really was this intense narrative game, and it was super well constructed narratively. It was fantastically well written, and the gunplay's awesome, and just every part of it surpassed expectations. I think people have been like, oh, this is what New Vegas wanted to be. And the conversation would just shift to Fallout 4 being amazing. But because Fallout 4 disappointed a lot of people based on what they were hoping to get, they looked back and were like, we wanted something like New Vegas. New Vegas is what we wanted. And with Starfield, I mean, the thing is now, like, we can point to a lot of other games that have released in the last handful of years that are big open world adventure games and just be like, you could have done anything like that. That would have been way better. Do something like that. So Again, maybe it'll change. Maybe when Elder Scrolls 6 is announced, it's going to be like bafflingly stupid, and we'll be like, oh, Starfield is when BGS was in its golden era, and Elder Scrolls 6 is terrible in comparison. Who knows? Who knows? But right now, as of today, it feels like the perception and the reputation of Starfield is not what we were expecting it to be, even amongst the community. And this is kind of what made me want to do this segment, is because I looked at the comment section in this video, and I was genuinely surprised at what a lot of his fans are saying, because a lot of Matty fans are Bethesda fans, and they tend to be very forgiving with Bethesda. But actually, like, they're pretty like constructive criticism focused comments. They need to put this one from Mark Spencer. They need to put a game within the game. It needs dungeons full of content and made exploration interesting, not empty, copy pasted and repeated areas, because that's what Starfield has. It's crazy how in the interview he said, quote, players love the open space in our games, end quote. Yeah, we love the open space when it actually leads to interesting things. Walking through Skyrim was cool because while you find these handcrafted things, you would eventually get to Riften or whatever city or place you were going to. If I go and walk around the moon, I'm never going to get anywhere. Therefore, early on, we realized there's no reason to explore planets beyond the quest you're doing. Yeah, it kind of defeats the purpose of exploration. And they tried to like half-ass do it where they're like, yeah, there's points of interest on the map, so go explore the points of interest on those planets when you land there. But they just end up being copy and pasted identically across the board. And so it's like, so there really is no reason to do it. Maybe Starfield would have been better served if like the points of interest that are generated when you land, if they were way less common. Maybe that would have been even better, because at least then you wouldn't see them copy and pasted so much. The biggest thing about Fallout 4 that made it so memorable was how every inch of the world felt so intentional and told a story, immersing the player into post-apocalyptic America so much more than 99% of Starfield immerses the player into the universe. I mean, I agree. Every part of Fallout 4 felt hand placed, and I'm sure a lot of it was also kind of built with procedural map systems and stuff, but the game felt like it was crafted by hand in a lot of ways, and no part of Starfield feels that way. This one from Preston Winters. I think Starfield is at the bottom of the list for Bethesda games. It's just missing the soul that made the others great. And for as large as the game is, there isn't enough stuff to fill it. There's 4 factions in the game when there should have been dozens. Honestly, this project was an all hands on deck situation. They should have all of their studios maybe working on different systems to come up with different factions and stories as large as this game is. Yeah, I mean, I think this is an issue of kind of maybe out of proportioned expectations coming from saying there's 1,000 planets in the game. If they had promised 100, I think people would have been just as stoked, if not more so, because like, oh, only 100 for you to have to deal with and worry about populating. That's cool. But, 1,000 is pretty tough to do. My main gripe with Bethesda as a whole is always the writing, both story and characters. In Starfield, however, the lack of actual exploration and handcrafted content hurts a lot, because despite gameplay being so much better than Fallout 4, there's nothing to do really. There's no fun in exploration. Even the planets are so obviously copy and pasted, generated near the player, not the same feel. I would agree. I mean, I think the biggest thing is that Bethesda in the past has been amazing at handcrafting like environmental stories where you look at these bodies on the floor and they're holding each other's hands, and then there's like a little novella next to them about a young couple in France, and like you see, okay, this was like a couple that was reading this book when the bombs fell, and it was very sweet. It was a sweet moment. Maybe they're having a picnic or something. Like, they tell a story just through some things being found on the ground. That's what Bethesda's always been amazing at. And Starfield almost entirely abandons that. They'll have that within some of these locations that end up being copy and pasted, which loses all sense of magic. It's like I mentioned in my review, where I was like, I found this cool alien dinosaur skull at the bottom of a mine. And I was like, that's awesome. Like, they stopped work in the mine because they found this thing and had to call in like an archaeologist or something. Like, that's really cool. And then like a few hours later, I find the exact same mine somewhere else, and it has the exact same thing in the same spot. A couple hours later, find the same mine again. And then later, find it again. Copy and paste it exactly. And it just pulls you out of any sense of immersion you had. It makes those encounters much less exciting or interesting because you're like, yep, seen this before, and it just burns you out. Herobrine, I've seen a couple of videos on how many tiles the planets have. For such a ridiculous amount of playscape that you can have on planets and moons, they should have limited it to one solar system, maybe with the dense content and fully scaled planets to have all that exploration space. It may not be as buzzwordy as 100 systems and 1,000 planets, but it's more fun and interesting than what they have now. I agree. I mean, I think the lesson for all game developers with Starfield is more is not always better. Promising 1,000 planets, who cares? Give me 10. Give me 1. That's awesome. Like most Star Wars stories, for example, take place on a couple of planets, maybe a few. And they're each totally different. But give me like a snow planet, give me a forested planet, give me a desert planet, and I'm good. Just do that. Just do that. Whatever you want to do. Like, just keep it within a scope and scale. But clearly, the Starfield was built around trying to be as huge as they possibly could manage. And it just, you know, in the process, they kind of forgot to see if it was going to be fun. You know, kind of an important thing. And lastly, let's see. Coffee Fox. I'm sick of games being given the grace to become good years down the line. We should hold companies to account for the product they have released now. Bethesda will keep putting out shit as long as people keep defending them and excusing their actions. And this is my... I would kiss Coffee Fox on the mouth if I saw them right now. This is my problem. And this is what I totally 1,000,000,000% agree with. The more you make excuses for these developers and companies, the more they will do it because there are no consequences. For Bethesda, if you excuse the lackluster graphics, guess what their next game will have? Lackluster graphics. If you excuse the constant load times and fast traveling, and you're like, I just don't think it's that big of a deal, when every other major developer has figured out a way to not have that in their games in 2023, guess what they're going to have in the next game? They're going to have constant load screens. Constant fast traveling. It's going to be there because their players don't care. And it reminds me of that interview Todd did where Todd was asked, why don't you have the seamless planet to surface transition? Why is there a load screen between them? And he said, well, I just don't think our players care about that. And he's right. Obviously, I mean, their core fans don't care about it and will excuse it. But they use that excuse for many, many problems within Starfield, where it's all framed around, we don't really think it's important to do that because our players don't really care that much. So, yeah, we're not going to mess with it. And I think that is a terrible way of dealing with it. I think that is horrible because it's going to mean that the next games that they put out are going to have the same exact problems, but they're going to be worse. It's why if you're a real fan of these developers, if you're a real fan of BGS or whoever, the way you help them is not by like sucking them off and keeping them happy. Like what you do is you be honest with them and you're just, listen guys, I think the writing's great, but like Jesus Christ, the exploration is asinine. Like there's not anything interesting to do while exploring. So your games that are all about exploring now, they're not interesting to explore. That was a huge disappointment. Like you have to be very clear and outline this stuff and they'll listen to it. I mean, they hear it. These developers, you know, Todd said that he regularly looks on the subreddits for their games, for feedback on things. He's constantly watching it. And I think that that's, you know, great for Todd. I think it's good on him for doing that. But it should also remind you that your voice can be heard. It does matter. And you should, I think they should really focus on trying to listen to that constructive criticism, because I would hate to see Elder Scrolls 6's potential just totally squandered because they thought, players were fine with Starfield, so we'll just kind of do the same thing over again. He took my thing.